Hi, my name is Mary Jane McCallum, and I'm here to introduce the 5th lecture in a special series about the history of Indigenous education. The series is sponsored by the Canada Research Chair in Indigenous People, History and Archives, and is hosted by the Winter 2025 class of the University of Winnipeg students in History 2616, History of Indigenous Education, Residential Schools and Beyond. It's facilitated by the staff at Studio 1L10 and by Research Director Catherine Boschman. In this series, invited guests lecture for about 45 minutes, and at that point, we'll excuse those who are joining us on Zoom, and we'll turn the visit over to the class when they can ask questions of our visitor. Today, our guest is Verna Kirkness. Verna Kirkness is a Cree scholar and educator. Rooted in Manitoba, Kirkness's influence is national in scope. Our class has read her book, Creating Space, for our course because it's an excellent source on the history of education. It can also be read in conversation with her many other works, and these are just a few. Aboriginal Languages, a collection of talks and papers. The Shocking Truth About Indians in Textbooks, textbook evaluation, Indians Without Teepees, and most recently, Fisher River Before 1950. Among her awards, she is a member of the Order of Canada, the Order of Manitoba. She holds a Queen's Golden Jubilee Medal, is a Manitoba 150 Women Trailblazer, and she has 6 honorary doctorates. These are just some of the markers of her amazing career and work. So we're so grateful to have Verna here in our class to speak. The title of her talk today is Creating Space in Academia for Indigenous Students. So I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Dancy, consider doing now. I just said, hi, do you understand me? I was going to give this lecture all in Cree, but I think I'll use English. Anyway, I'm happy to be here to see you and be with you and share some of my writing, I guess you'd say, or my life with you. And it's been a while since I've done this, because I have been retired actually for over 30 years. Since I was officially in a classroom, you know, but I have had the privilege of visiting the classrooms quite often, and especially at UBC, because I lived in Vancouver and worked there for the last many years, actually. Yes, so I'm just happy to see you. I thought for a minute there were no men in here, but put your hands up, men. There's 2 of you. Yeah, I thought this was a feminine class. No. Anyway, I have some things to share with you just about my experiences and my life, and I want to thank you for reading my book. I never ever suspected it was going to be used at a university, that's for sure, and I think you're the only ones that have done it, I'm not sure. But anyway, when I read it now, I think there are a lot of things I could have put in there and expanded on, because I brought some of my books here. When I wrote a book, I should have gone into some detail about the book itself, you know, but I simply listed that I wrote this many books or something instead of that. So remember that if you're ever just writing a book, get into the details of the content, you know. It's no use saying, oh, I wrote Creating Space and then nothing else, you know. But anyway, I wanted to share with you, first of all, This book is called O Great Creator. And I want to use this because my dear friend, her name is Ruth Elizabeth Betty Spence, but her name is really Betty or Mrs. Spence to be, or my substitute mother, a very wonderful friend who just passed away on February 22nd after turning 107 years old on February 11th. Yeah, 11 days after. I visited her on her birthday, and it was so nice to be with her, just to sit beside her and rub her back and, you know, talk to her. I mean, the feeling is really deep when you have someone like that. She was my mentor as well. So I want to read to you. She was also a student counselor at Saskatchewan Indian Federated College. It's now known as First Nations University of Canada in Regina. And she had a book of prayers that she used that were appropriate for students. And I thought in her memory, as she just left us recently, I wanted to read to you one of her prayers. And I did this for her, by the way. I compiled her prayers and printed this, you know, this little book for her. Anyway, here it is. She said, "O great Creator, we thank and praise you for all your blessings. Help our hearts to grow in respect and humility. Fill our minds with wisdom and understanding of the work we have yet to do for you. Remind us to love and be patient with others. Lift us out of our own self-importance so that we can and be kind to those less fortunate. We ask your blessing upon these sitting in this case, in your presence, and bless those with whom they come in contact. Be with those who are grieving for their loved ones, which I'm doing right now. Ease their pain so that they may have peace. O great Creator." It's a beautiful book. Yeah. I've had the wonderful privilege of being a teacher. You know, as a little girl, we lived right beside the school, and I apparently left my house and went over to the school, knocked on the school door when I was 4 years old, and they had to send me home. And I guess I did that several times. I really loved school. Later on, when I attended school very regularly, my mother said, "I'm washing clothes today, Verna, you have to stay home and help." Well, I cried. I made a nuisance of myself until she said, "Oh, go to school then." So I really loved school. And I was fortunate. I didn't go to residential school, but I was fortunate to go to high school in a town called Toulon. Some of you may have heard of it. And it was a student residence there for mostly farm kids, because I'm talking about the 50s. So there were no high schools in the little towns, so there were all non-Indigenous people that were, or students that were in that place. There were only capacity for 12 to 15 girls, and there was a boys' residence too. So we went, it was good. I managed to get through grade 12, and then I went to summer school, and after summer school, I was 18 years old, and then I started, at 18, I went to a 6-week summer course. They were short of teachers, and I got hired at a school with 30 kids, grade 1 to 8. Can you picture that? And my oldest student was 15, and I'm 18. Guess what? I have lunch with him now and again right now. I'll tell you, I'm 89 and he's 85. So anyway, it was a wonderful experience at the same time, you know. And so I was a teacher for a number of years. I taught at Norway House, taught at my own reserve, which was a challenge. My sister didn't know whether to call me Verna or Miss Kirkness. I'd get home, she'd say, Verna, Miss Kirkness, Verna. I'd say, just call me Verna. Anyway, I taught school for a few years here. Then I moved on to, what did I do next? After teaching, what did I do next? I should remember these things. Oh yeah, I went to counseling. I was counseling in the city and counseling students in vocational and high school. And then you have to remember, I already told you I'm 89, so I might ask you to remind me what I said last, and you be on the ball. So anyway, after, where was I?
Counseling.
Yeah, no, seriously.
Counseling.
Oh yeah, counseling. I was in counseling, and then I had an opportunity to go and supervise teachers. I was called a supervisor of teachers for Frontier School Division. And so I went and did that, and I had 200 teachers all by myself, and I'm still young, and I'm going around, and believe this, I didn't even have a degree, and they didn't even know that. I mean, I had this big job. But you know, as an Indigenous person at that time, there were so few of us that I could almost name my job, you know, when these came up and they wanted an Indigenous person. So I did that. Well, I loved teaching, and I knew what a good teacher was, I'll tell you that much. And I knew what we needed and so on. And after that experience, I really learned that we needed more Indigenous material. You know what? There was not one book I could find. No, I found one. Normie's Moose Hunt and Normie's Goose Hunt, done by this Norma somebody now, I forget her name. But that's the only books that I could find. Now remember that this is in, you know, the 70s. There was no books, or late 60s. This was late 60s. And so after, you know, working on that for a number of years, then I had an opportunity to come and work at the Department of Education in curriculum consultant. And I'm still doing night school and part-time, trying to get degree and you know, and work on these things at the same time. So anyway, I worked there, and I really worked on the curriculum. We did a whole thing on a history of Indigenous people, right from the beginning, from grade 1 all the way to grade 12. And of course, we couldn't be the ones to make it compulsory, and I don't know how well it was used, but we like whatever the situation was in those various grades, we tried to put something in the context of Indigenous people. So that was just really, what I'm telling you is there was nothing like that around. We had to work, oops, I'm hitting this thing. We had to work on getting these things because there was nothing like that. One of the things I think is really important to know, that at that time there were a lot of schools in the north, and I'll talk about Norway House, Cross Lake, Split Lake, all those northern communities where the children only spoke their own language. They only knew Cree. And any of you here that are Indigenous and were in your communities where people spoke only their own language will understand how hard it is for a person that does not speak the language to be teaching in that language, or you have silent students, you know, can't understand. So while I was there, when I was at residential school, they didn't let me do that because Indian Affairs was very strict. They always said you have to follow the provincial curriculum. And so that's what we were doing, trying to just follow that curriculum. And of course, then I couldn't introduce teaching in the native language in that situation. So when I was working for the Department of Education, I did that. I chose about 7 or 9 communities, and I went out to these communities and set up a plan and worked with teachers. At that time, there was a number of teacher aides. We call them teacher aides. They helped the teacher. They were Cree speakers, so they were the ones that became the teachers of these children. So we had a plan. I've got it written down, I guess, into one of these here. So I did that in that grade. So that was really important. I remember we were using English letters. We didn't know whether to use syllabics like this or English letters. So we used what's called Roman orthography. We wrote them, and we made about 16 readers, not very thick, like 20, 30 pages. And we thought, oh, this is going to last for a couple of years. I think it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and they were all read. Which goes to show when it's in your language, or it was in Roman orthography, but they knew the sounds and could read. So that was really interesting that time. But anyway, let me backtrack now. That's not the way I was going to do this. But anyway, we'll leave it at that point, and don't forget where we are. In the early days, this is not my first book, but Bruce Seeley was a colleague of mine. One time we took our Easter holiday and wrote a whole social studies for grades 1 to 3, like a curriculum. And so we got good colleagues. He worked at the Department of Ed, and I was still with Frontier School Division. Anyway, so we decided we were tired of people asking us, what is culture? What is a Métis? Why do you need to have your language? All kinds of questions. So we decided we'd write this book. This was in 1973. So in this book, we're just tired of people asking us very basic questions. So we wrote in this book about the settlement of the Americas, for instance, Indians of Canada, a historical sketch, the Métis, Indian culture, Algonquin linguistics, Indians' contribution to the world, problems of Indians and Métis in rural areas, problems of Indian and Métis in urban centers, education of the Indian and Métis. Some of these chapters were mine and Bruce's, and some were other people that we knew that had a good expertise in this. Like this lady I was talking about that wrote the prayers, her husband wrote about Algonquin linguistics, and the importance of our language. So that was what we had to do, and I'm talking about the 70s now, where people knew very little about Indigenous people. And then I guess this is a good place. I'm still, the next thing I had was after the curriculum branch, I really liked my work in the Department of Education because I could do a lot of things. I had started working on, the history, social studies all the way through. Oh, I can't think of what it is. Anyway, it's in here. It's in the book. Something happened very significant in 1969. You may know this. The government of Canada, Jean Chrétien, I think was the Minister of Indian Affairs in Trudeau's days, old Trudeau, not young Trudeau. And and they put out a white paper where they wanted to remove the special status of Indigenous people, that they wouldn't recognize our treaties anymore or acknowledge us as the first people of this country. And so this is the first time Indigenous people across Canada reacted to a government directive, a government white paper. And so I got asked from the Department of Education to join the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood. I wanted to change it to sisterhood, but they wouldn't change it. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, it was the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood. It's the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs now. So they want all these different, every province and territory had an Indigenous organization by then. So almost everyone, I think everyone, wrote a position paper. And this is our position paper here. And in this paper, I was hired. I had to leave the department. I didn't want to. I liked that, but I really felt, I'll tell you this, I felt like I was the best one to write this about education. I mean, there were no others around. I didn't have much competition. So they wanted me to come and work on the education part. So I accepted, and we had an interesting process, I'll tell you. You know, I was in education, somebody else was in health, someone was in social development, and we were all responsible for our own areas to write about this. The chiefs of Canada, of our own province here, met in Winnipeg. And an interesting process at that time, because a lot of people still spoke their own language. We were in groups, like I worked with Cree people, somebody else worked with the Anishinaabe, somebody else worked with the Sioux, you know, like that, the Dene, and so on. So we were able to, then we'd write what they felt the reaction should be to this white paper. And then we'd have another meeting and we'd explain to them what we had. It was like back and forth like that. They'd come in and so on. So to make a long story short, we ended up writing this book. It didn't look like this then, but it's published now. You can find it. It's called Wabung. Wabung is an Ojibwe word, Anishinaabe word meaning our tomorrows. This was printed as a special 40th anniversary edition, you know. So I have this copy here. And I did the education section with the chiefs. And one of the things that came clear in here, and again, I have to just tell you the main points, was that the people were tired of Indian Affairs telling them where their children would go to school. You know, because first they had them in residential schools, had us in residential schools. And so and then this integration came in and they were going to provincial schools, never having a say, never asking Indigenous people if that's what they wanted. And so, to make this short, they said that they wanted to have more say in their children's education. That was the main thing. They wanted to have they wanted to be in charge and say where their children would go to school and even what they would learn. I remember also a lot of our students, our children were already going to provincial schools. So they wanted school trustees to be Indigenous people on the boards of school trustees, you know. And so, but the main thing, the main message out of this in education was that the people wanted to be responsible for the education of their own children. This is a very interesting book, and I don't know if you've used it or seen it. Yeah, okay, so I might be repeating things that you said. But a good thing that follows that is this, and I'm really shocked that we never got it printed nice like a book, because this is the turning point for Indigenous education, at least for the treaty status Indian people that are responsible to, or not responsible to, who are governed under Indian affairs and the Indian Act. So this one, so I worked on that on Wabung, and after that, the National Indian Brotherhood, again, Assembly of, what do they call them now? Assembly of...
First Nations.
Oh yeah, Assembly of First Nations in Ottawa. So after I got taken from this Manitoba one over to Ottawa, because we wanted to look at all the papers from all the provinces, see what it was that they were all asking for in common. And in common was Indian control of Indian education. Don't forget we were still Indians then. we're now Indigenous. We've been everything along the way. So anyway, so I got to work on this with a team, and each organization in the province and territories had an education director. And so we'd meet together, and we came up with this as a, we're still dealing with a white paper in education. We're saying our parents, our people want to have control of education. So we had all these different meetings again and talking with parents, et cetera, especially looking at the papers that we had. Like this Wabung would be part of it, and then I remember BC put out their paper and they called it the brown paper, and Alberta put out a paper, they called it red paper. By the time it got to us, we ran out of colors. So, so we just called it Wabung, our tomorrows. Yeah, that was it. So anyway, this one here, this is one of the most important documents in Indigenous education. To this day, for you to know, and when you're talking to people, find this copy, find this book, because this truly is the turning point where parents then could have a say in their children's education. No more going to the bands and the reserves and picking up the kids and taking them to Bertel or Brandon or wherever, you know, to the residential schools. No more of that. And so, I mean, that's what this paper asked for. But the main thing we had to get from here was approval by Indian Affairs that they would see this as our policy. This is the policy that we came up with. And so actually, believe it or not, some things are unbelievable, but this is what it says here. We presented this to the minister. It says, it was presented to the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development on December 21st, 1972. In a letter dated February 2nd, 1973, the minister gave official recognition to Indian control of Indian education, approving its proposals and committing the Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development to implementing them. So there it was. You know, we still didn't have charge of the money, but we could at least lay out our plans, how we would want to do this. And so I did my follow-up work to this for the national office was to go to the communities, work with my colleagues in the provinces and territories, the education directors, and also go to the communities and hold workshops. I used to hold 3-day workshops. And I dealt with 4 questions, or maybe 5. One is, where are we now? Like I said, you have to know what you have, and you have to know what changes you want to make, because Indian Affairs thought we were still going to run it like Indian Affairs. They're just transferring their program. But that's not what we had in mind. We wanted to change everything and to be in control about the curriculum, the teachers, and, you know, we still didn't stray from reading, writing, arithmetic, math, science, everything, you know, history. The history is something. But anyway, yes, so where was I with street?
3-day workshops. Your workshops?
Oh yes, the workshops, thank you. Where are we now? How did we get to where we are? Just think about them. Never mind writing. Where do we want to go? That was critical question. Where do we want to go? What do you want to change? Gosh, I remember doing this workshop in my own reserve. I can still see my mother sitting on the floor with a flip chart paper, writing all these things down that people were saying, you know. It was a wonderful process of working with the bands, and usually about 2 or 3 days of talking about that, you know, how they were going to take over and what they were going to do. Where are we now? How did we get to where we are? Where do we want to go? How will we know when we're there? You know, that's a critical one too. How will we know when we're there? And so that was going on. You know, today, I hope you realize this is. I don't know. You're not teachers, I guess, but you're historians. What do you do anyway? No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just fooling. Anyway, you know, you have a way of telling people about things, and I think these are important things to share about this history and where we are, especially what it means for our own people to be running their education now. I mean, later on, like we have Manitoba MF First Nations Resource Center, we have the Cultural Center. You know, we have places you can go to get, the teachers can go to get help, and so on. But for some time, it was a process. It was quite a process to work with people. But you know, to me, as I say, I started in '54. I'm history. When it comes to Indigenous ed, I was there at the beginning. I was there before there was a darn thing. There was nothing. I never had an Indigenous teacher, never had an Indigenous professor, nobody. We just had to blaze our own trail way back then. Yeah, so it's really, you know, when you think of the progression and how far we've come, I see it, I appreciate it. I see all these graduates coming out of university now, you know, qualified to be anything we want to be, anything people want to, in a walk of life you want to go into. And I'm really, you know, so I always was optimistic, never a pessimist. Always knew we're going to get there. We're going to get there somehow. What else do I have? As part of the work along the way, this is kind of a sad thing about our languages. Oops, I still talk. I mean, I know my language, but my generation is really about the last that know our language. So it was deteriorating, and so I always was, no matter what job I had, I was always pushing for the revival of Aboriginal languages, you know, to bring them back. And I remember in year 2000, I said, let's have a motto that says, we'll all know, all the Crees will know how to speak Cree in 20 years, in 2020. I think there's 5 more now. No, just kidding, not 5. But really, you know, it was something important. So I wrote this book too because I had just the kind of things that I proposed. One time I got a study for, geez, how much was it now? Sometimes it sounds like a lot, 100 million or 10 million, or I forget how many million, from that we had proposed. A guy that used to be a deputy minister and I wrote this proposal. And what happened to that proposal? Anyway, it was a good proposal. Oh yes, I know what it was. Sometimes things happen that are not so good. Remember this, we had this and it was approved by all the people around, you know, and it sat at the Assembly of First Nations, and then suddenly there was a snap election and it got lost. And it was the Secretary of State, not the Indian Affairs at that time, and he was ready. I still remember him, David Crombie. He was such a good person, and he knew, you know, what we needed. And he would have been prepared from Secretary of State to put the money out there so that all the bands, and my thinking always was with languages is that everyone that wanted to, and there were many proposals that were put out that they want to do their language, they should just be able to apply for funds to do it their own way. We didn't have to have something that everybody had to follow, because they all had ideas. I remember so distinctly. We want to do it this way, that way. We might have done something to save our languages, but again, as I say, sometimes we are our own worst enemy. And it just sat on that desk. And somebody was praising that particular president the other day, but I bit my tongue. I didn't say. I didn't say. Yeah, he sat on a proposal where we could have had lots of money to revive our languages. How time is it?
3:07.
How much time do we have?
Oh boy, so about 10 more minutes?
Oh, yeah. I have, this is going back now to 76, but did I tell you a bit about this? Anyway, when we were telling you about languages again, I'm really sad about the state of our languages and the dying of Indigenous languages in the world, not only here, but everywhere. And so we had this native bilingual program that I introduced when I was with the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood, Assembly of First Nations. I was the education director. So we introduced this, it's got to be known as the Manitoba Native Bilingual Program. So I went to different reserves and I got about, I think, 7 reserves and a couple of Métis communities. And we started a program to revive this. Did I mention something about it? I might have done that. Anyway, like where they started as a nursery, all in the language. I think I said a bit about it, didn't I? A bit, yeah, a bit. So in the language, and then we gradually, it was called a language shift that I'd learned about somewhere that they had done this. And so you start with nursery kids all in their language because they came knowing only their language. And then in kindergarten, you start to introduce English, sort of much as you do as TESOL, teaching English second language. And then gradually, grade 1, like you could see the slope as you went along, you know, and it got higher. And so you introduce a little more, maybe, I don't know what kind of course, I can't think of it now. But anyway, until grade 4, we did it up to grade 4. And at that time, they were still learning their language. You know what? If you had a language, a home language as a child, it's wrong not to keep that language going as well. You're aborting that language, and it's best to have them going parallel. You know, you can learn. Actually, that happened to me just more by accident than by design. My grandmother was ill, and so I stayed with her a lot, and she only spoke Cree. So of course, then I learned Cree. That's the only way I could talk to her. Later on in life, it was really interesting because my next sister, 2 sisters, and my brother, they could understand it, but they couldn't speak it. So my grandfather had a lot of interesting stories. So I used to go and talk to him, and they'd come with me because they could understand it. You know that thing? That's curious, isn't it? That you can understand another language, but you can't speak it. And that's what was happening there. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, with this bilingual program, we gradually shifted the language, and mostly because we developed it that long, at least up to grade 4, keeping their own language as well, you know, sort of side by side after. That I ran into someone in the PA a few years ago, but he was a man, he's working on a job, and he said, you know, Verna, I did that Cree at Cross Lake all the way to grade 12 because Cross Lake really kept it up. They kept going. He said, now I'm a Cree teacher, you know, so that was really wonderful. So anyway, I had written it up because it was a project, you know, bilingual program. I've got,
Gave me the signal
oh
for 5
gosh,
minutes.
this is important and I didn't talk about it. Indians in textbooks. Oh, the shocking truth, oh my goodness. The shocking truth about Indians in textbooks, my gracious. We looked at the grade 4, 5, and 6 social studies, mostly grade 6. But grade 4 had one, I'll tell you about it. It's called Manitoba, Its Peoples and Places. They devoted 3 pages to Indians, to Indigenous people. Only 3 pages in the history of Manitoba, its people and places. And in those 3, the pictures you saw was, do you think their father works? Another picture said, do you think they're as clever as you? I mean, and then we took issue with it, and the publisher said, that's the inquiry approach. Are you crazy? They're grade 4s, you know? Yeah, so things like that were going on. And then in the other, you wouldn't believe how much we found in this, you know, how there was by omission and by disparagement and by every which way possible. Because of the time, and I'm sorry I didn't watch the time. I had written some of the things here. All the guys, oh, I can't find it now. There was bias, like by cumulative implication. Wonder if this is it. By great good fortune, Cartier learned of an Indian remedy made from tree bark, probably the bark of the white spruce. When it was tried out on the sick men, it worked wonders. I mean, some things like that, but there was one I was going to show you that was really bad. Anyway, what it said was, you take the dirtiest part of it. This is making pemmican. Oh, jeez. Oh, it's too bad. I'm sorry. I'm not organized here at the end. I talk too much at the other things. And you mix it with, oh gosh, I wish I could find it. Wait a minute. This one, I think. Okay, here it is. This is a good example. This is bias by defamation. The bourgeois willingly paid pemmican prices for top quality pemmican. They also scaled down the prices paid for poor stuff, unhappily described by one of them. Take scrapings from the dirtiest outside of a very stale piece of cold roast beef, add to it lumps of tallowy, rancid fat, then garnish all with human hair and short hairs from dogs and oxen, and you have pemmican. Just, you know, I mean, that's just one example, but I had several here, and you can get this book. Oh, I don't know, you're almost finished your course, I bet. But if you're just interested, The Shocking Truth About Indians in Textbooks, it's at the Manitoba Indigenous Cultural Education Center on Sutherland Avenue. So, yeah, there's there's bias in so many ways in all those textbooks that we looked at. And we only did social studies. Oh yeah, it's by omission, by defamation, by disparagement, something that lowers a thing or less important, cumulative implication, lack of validity, inertia, disembodiment. I got this. I had this study done, and I had a number of people working on it. When I went to present this to the government, we asked for, of course, the Minister of Education because he's in charge of textbooks and that. And we were all there. I had my presentation ready, and we're all set to go. Guess what? The Minister of Education didn't come. The Minister of Corrections came. Imagine that. No, that's right. And I mean, he's not there to correct this kind of stuff. He's there for prisoners. No, I don't know. But anyway, this is a good book here. Gee, I'm sorry. Anyway, there's nothing much to say about this. Except I hope you caught the idea that when I first started teaching, there may have only been 20 Indigenous teachers in Canada. I don't know who counted them, but somebody said that. You know, somebody, wow. It's written down somewhere. And so, I mean, I was part of this whole thing as it developed over the years. So when I say creating space, of course, if you read it, you know that I tried to create space in our classrooms, you know, in education period, certainly in university, you know, and even creating space in courses. Tried working at a university and getting a new Indigenous course passed, you know, has to go all over the place, right? I don't know what Senate knows about it, but they always have to see it. Anyway, things like that. So I'll just close by, sorry I ramble a lot and go on, but I'm pleased to have seen you and met with you and wish you the best, and thank you for taking time to read my book.
Thank you very much, Verna. So now we'll say goodbye to the people who've joined us online, and we'll open it up to questions from our class.